we found that there are real gaps between different styles of political messaging, different focuses of politics. I mean, I guess I would sort of divide that into sort of three main axes that each, accounted for, broadly speaking, a 5-point gap, maybe even a 5 to 10 point gap in political results when we did these head-to-head matchups of candidates featuring different attributes against each other, really simulating the choices voters face in the ballot box rather than just throwing up isolated slogans or policy ideas. So I think this already gives us a sort of a more real-world sense of how voters operate. But candidates who offered an economic focus as opposed to a sort of a bread and butter focus, as opposed to a focus on racial justice or immigration, that was accounted for broadly about a 5-point boost in the polls. Candidates who spoke in populist rather than what we sort of shorthanded as woke language, that is identity-centered language, sort of highlighting suffering and vulnerability and diversity, and that made a moral appeal as opposed to that made a concrete economic material appeal, blaming millionaires and lobbyists. That also accounted for, again, a broadly 5 to 10 point difference. And then candidate background themselves also mattered. So candidates who were teachers and construction workers performed significantly better than candidates who were attorneys or CEOs. Working class voters want to vote for working class candidates, and that's something that we should keep in mind. So when you mix and match some of these attributes, you got some really striking findings. A teacher, you could really build up massive leads, and this is a new stat that they've unveiled for me today. A progressive populist teacher, that is, who spoke in language of, a battle against the super rich, and with a focus on economics, won 76% of our sample. Whereas if you had a CEO, this is a very plausible Democratic candidate, by the way, a CEO who we classed as a kind of a woke moderate with an emphasis on sort of diversity and fighting for affordable health care in a kind of very muted way, with a focus on racial justice. That candidate won 44% of the vote. So this is a 32-point gap. I mean, this is actually staggering to me, even in terms of, vindicating a certain theory of politics. This isn't even a 10-point gap. These are massive cleavages that really show what working class voters want.
So one thing that's really interesting is the survey finds that there's a messaging problem, but I also think Democrats have a deeper problem than just a messaging one, because I'm thinking of why these pitches are made in woke terminology, and the survey says progressives do not need to surrender questions of social justice to win working class voters, but certain identity-focused rhetoric is a liability. But that rhetoric is how they sort of push through neoliberal economic policies. It's more than just the style. It's connected to their substance of kind of sneaking things through. So when you say the CEO candidate is plausible, the teacher one is really, really interesting. I guess I'm just wondering, from looking at the data and analyzing the data, how it's possible for Democrats to balance the style and the rhetoric with also, because you get caught in these traps where if you say one thing wrong, the media pounces and says, you're a sexist, you're a racist. We saw Bernie Sanders go on Joe Rogan, and that was a controversy in and of itself. So how is a Democrat supposed to balance all of these things?
The real concern here the White House should have is not some bad press, but the fact that from the beginning, the people have never been that fond of Kamala Harris. She has historically low approval ratings for a vice president, especially considering that she hasn't done much of anything. And let's not forget how poorly she failed in the Democratic primary, when many people felt as though she was going to be a front runner very early on. Ryan Graham, I think you wrote an article in The Intercept pointing out that Bernie Sanders outpaced her with black voters by a 2-to-1 margin, that she had to drop out of the primary before her own state of California because she was polling, I believe, 5th behind Andrew Yang. And all the while, the media still tried to frame her as the next Barack Obama, this great kind of mixed race hope that was going to be a unifier for the country in some really reductive way. And I think that might have worked against her because a lot of people woke up to the fact that representational politics doesn't move the country forward in the way that people had hoped with Barack Obama. And they were waiting for her to show up with some actual charisma, with an agenda, with a plan, with policies that really matched the moment. She never did. And now she's in this position where she's having to rise and fall on her own merits. And what we see now is that she is in fact falling.
And as somebody who's covered White Houses and covered Congress for a long time, I can say that if you want to write one of these stories with people on the deep periphery then and give them anonymity, that's fairly easy to do. But to get quotes like that and to get insight like that from people who are kind of in the inner circle is actually not that easy to do, even granting anonymity. And this is the third or fourth major piece like this. If you remember, the New York Times had a devastating piece after her campaign imploded. And there was, I think Politico did one maybe several months ago. And so, this is of a piece with that reporting. Is there something about it being at CNN.com that is even more kind of frightening to Harris for her political prospects? CNN has almost supplanted MSNBC as the kind of lodestar or the North Star for Democratic primary voters. If you've lost CNN, what hope do you have as a Democrat?
I'm not sure about the outlet, but what raised big red flags for me was all of the covering that comes out of the Jen Psaki tweet, the Jim Clyburn appearance. It has very much the air of the kid who comes home from school complaining about bullying and the mother who says, "Don't worry about it, honey. Everybody loves you. You're perfect. Never change." It's a kind of delusional sort of gaslighting, and it very much has the feeling of thou dost protest too much.
The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals put an emergency temporary hold on the vaccine mandate until they could fully look it over. Then within days, the court issued a scathing 22-page opinion reading Biden's mandate, the Riot Act, and ordered the federal government to stop enforcement. The court said the mandate was fatally flawed constitutionally for a number of reasons. First, the administration openly admitted it was looking for a workaround to force Americans into the vaccine and just ended up landing on OSHA, but would have used any vehicle they could find. The court wondered what makes a company with 100 employees so much more hazardous than a company with 99, since this mandate only applies to companies with 100 employees or more. Also, if this is such an emergency, why was Biden waiting 90 days to begin the mandate? Quote, the mandate is staggeringly overbroad, applying to 2 out of 3 private sector employees in America. In workplaces as diverse as the country itself, the mandate fails to consider what is perhaps the most salient fact of all. The ongoing threat of COVID-19 is more dangerous to some employees than to other employees. All else equal, a 28-year-old trucker spending the bulk of his workday in the solitude of his cab is simply less vulnerable to COVID-19 than a 62-year-old prison janitor. Likewise, a naturally immune unvaccinated worker is presumably at less risk than an unvaccinated worker who has never had the virus. The list goes on. But one constant remains. The mandate fails almost completely to address or even respond to much of this reality and common sense. Now, I agree with them, but a lot of this, unfortunately, doesn't seem to be common sense for many these days. Now, as a result, OSHA has now announced it is suspending the mandate for private companies pending future developments in the litigation, if there ever are any. Now, though the mandates have been halted for private companies, there are still mandates in effect for federal employees and contractors, military, and healthcare workers. And there are numerous lawsuits challenging each one of these, so we'll keep you posted if there are any developments. Now, the entire point of the mandates is to stop or slow the spread of COVID, not just Biden's worker mandates, but also the mandate to attend events, schools, to travel, or even to just go out to bars and restaurants in some cities. The government, media, and Fauci have told us we all need to be vaccinated in order to end the pandemic. It's so important that the government is telling us to get the jab or lose our jobs. It's so important that the government is requiring us to be vaccinated in order to roam freely and enjoy our lives. So many Americans did it. But let's take a look at some recent headlines. The definition of fully vaccinated is changing to 3 COVID-19 doses. Are you fully vaccinated? Did you do it so you could just live your life freely? Well, you might need another dose to gain access to that bar you love. Now that booster doses are being required in places like the UK and Israel in order to be considered fully vaccinated, many are wondering if a mandatory third shot or second shot of Johnson & Johnson will be required here in the U.S. as well. As of right now, in the U.S., the booster dose is recommended, not required. But as soon as the FDA and CDC give the green light for everyone to get the booster, this very well could change, especially with headlines like these. 8 dead, 89 infected after COVID outbreak at Connecticut nursing home. Greer Village Senior Community has 70 residents. 67 of them, as well as 22 staffers, have caught COVID in the past month and a half. and every single one of them, except for 2, were fully vaccinated. This isn't a unique story. In fact, this is exactly what health officials in Israel were warning us about. These vaccines wear off quickly. They're unlike any other vaccines we've ever been required to take. Other vaccines, like polio and measles, which are required to attend school, give you immunity. The smallpox vaccine, which was mandated in certain cities, gave a person immunity. Once you get the vaccine, you can't get the virus. You're safe. Simple as that. Sure, there's maybe a few breakthrough cases, but they genuinely are rare, very rare. We don't hear about millions of people breaking out with measles or polio after being vaccinated. Now, it's possible that a 3rd dose will do it. A 3rd dose might just be the magic bullet. It's still a little too early to tell, but take a look at this headline. Christmas canceled in world's most vaxxed place after exponential rise in COVID cases. Now, Gibraltar has vaccinated 100% of its population with 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine and have given the majority of their adults a booster dose as well. They are the most vaccinated country on earth after rapidly deploying mass vaccinations beginning back in February. Yet, with much of its population triple jabbed and everybody double jabbed, they are currently experiencing a larger outbreak than they've seen since before they rolled out a single shot.